to give you a heads up on the project, here is what we're looking at. Compose a musical piece at least 2 minutes in length with only software-based instruments, no audio tracks. There should be a minimum of 4 software instrument tracks used in the project. Project should demonstrate a variety of advanced MIDI concepts, including the use of performance controllers, which are just these things, right? MIDI draw, which we're going to talk about today, use of continuous or switch controller parameter, and editing of individual and multiple MIDI notes. You may use a maximum of 2 MIDI loops, and you can use a maximum of 2 preset patches. So, who doesn't know what some of those things are?
Can I guess what some of them are?
Sure.
Continuous switch or switch controller parameters are these pitch bend and modulation.
Those would be continuous controller parameters, right? Anything that you can modify continuously, right? We talked about last a couple weeks. That was last week. Yeah. Continuous changes, right?
So
Or pitch bend.
the switch controller would.
Switch would be turning something on or turning something off. So things like turning sustain on, anything that can be turned on or off completely.
You don't have a sustain pedal.
We don't necessarily need a pedal.
Oh, okay.
Because you can do it inside of MIDI draw or the pencil tool, which we'll look at today.
I'm going to see what's the pedal.
What's that?
I'm going to see what's the sustain pedal.
That works too, yeah. That totally works.
Just made me want to go home, honestly. I got one at home.
It's okay. You can add, fix it in post, right?
There we go.
Work.
There we go.
Right, but it's a learning process, right?
That's the whole point.
If I had a pedal, I would have used it here. But I was able to do it manually. Any other questions about what they see up here?
Preset patches.
Good. So that was one that I thought might get a couple questions. So,
Because if I knew there were preset patches, I would be using them.
right. Hence the stipulation in the write-up. Yes, sir.
No,
Go ahead. You know what preset patches are?
Yeah.
Okay. Put it.
let's say you're using a piano plugin. The developer would preload it with certain presets, like they'll call it whatever name that's similar to the sound it produces. And like for the synth plugin, you'll see synth bass, finger bass, pick bass, things like that. They'll give you like EQs that sound like a Les Paul or attempt to sound like a Les Paul. And yeah, things like that. They're just pre-developed settings on the plugin that you're using.
Where do you find that at?
Okay, so we'll do a little gander at that right now, right?
So,
Go ahead.
no,
From someone who uses them all the time.
Show off.
No, it's fine.
no, for real, I really do. Like when I go on Logic, I literally rarely use. The presets are pretty much the main thing I usually go to because I know exactly what I want.
Right.
Instead of actually going to a specific plugin.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So to clarify, so let me pull this up. So if say you have, say we have no tracks, right? And we go to add a new track, we're going to add a software instrument track, right? It's going to default to classic electric piano, right? There's a couple ways that we can get a new voice in this channel, right? We can,
Press button.
sorry?
Plus button. On the,
Here? Well, that would add a new track,
Okay.
right? But if we wanted to change the current one, there's a couple ways to go about that. So you can go and choose the actual instrument, the software instrument, by clicking. The current one is in the channel strip, right? It says ePiano. Did we see that?
Mm-hmm.
Clicking that little drop-down arrow brings up all of the software instruments that are available to me. It will not bring up, say, a reverb because it knows it's smart, right? It's so-called smart, right? It's a software instrument channel, so it's only going to pull up software instrument plugins. So you can then go in and choose and say, I want the EFM1 stereo FM synthesizer. Oop. I also want to be heard. Sounds horrible, doesn't it? Hey, okay.
I mean, granted, I'm not a keyboard player, so.
Silence sometimes is good though. Okay, so here is my FM synth, right? That's the stock factory default EFM1 FM synthesizer, right? In a couple weeks, we're going to talk about how to tweak this thing to get different sounds, what some of these parameters are, but I want you to start playing with some of these parameters to see what you think they do and to kind of learn by twiddling, as I like to say. So that's one way, right? And then from there, you can access presets in the plugin, in the software instrument, by clicking on factory default. And then there's a little drop down here. Thing like leads, FM pads, FM bass, bells, right? And you can just pull up and say, I want a calming pad.
Oh yeah,
Oh, it's calming, isn't it?
very much.
Okay. It's nice. So that's a preset. That's one way to pull up a preset. So there's another way that you can pull up patches. So there's a slight difference between a preset and a patch. A preset is you go into the plugin itself, click the drop down, find the preset listed here through different categorizations, right? Pick it and start playing with it. That's a preset. A patch, if you top left corner, there's a little drawer that looks like a little card catalog drawer or something like that. It says library. There's also, you can pull up patches in there. So if I were to go turn this off entirely, remove this instrument, and just click this drawer, right? I get options, right? Bass, drum kit, electronic drum kit, guitar, mallet, orchestral, synthesizer, vintage clav, vintage electric piano, right? So there's these options that give us an idea for the kind of patch that we're going to be pulling up. These are similar to presets, but you might notice that if I pick, say, guitar, which is funny, the guitar category comes up with some things that might not necessarily from the surface seem like they're guitars, right? Things like, where'd it go? Amped synth lead, right? That seems like a synth, not a guitar. And this is what I'm saying. So these are patches, right? So amped synth lead, if I pull that up, we find out that that's actually sculpture synth with a pedal board effect on it, with an amp modeler, channel EQ, compressor, delay, and reverb, right? So it's a patch, meaning they've tweaked all of these settings, added all these effects to get you the approximation of a guitar by doing a couple clicks, right? Which is not to be frowned upon, right? Presets and patches are great because you can pull them up quickly. They're particularly great for live performance. If you get a patch that you like, you can toggle to it quickly. A lot of people use MainStage. We talked a little bit about MainStage last week. It's sort of the live performers version of Logic, right? So this is a patch, right? And what I'm saying about a maximum of 2, right? You can use a maximum of 2 patches or presets, right? So what I want you to do is, with some of these, pull up the bass level software instrument, pick one, and start messing with it, right? You might not want to pick this one because it's a little complicated. But you can use some presets and patches by doing those shortcuts. But I do want you to do a couple that are, I pulled up the factory default and started messing with stuff to get the sound more like what I wanted.
Well, we don't have to use patches anymore.
You do not.
Okay.
If you don't want to use any, that's fine. But I'm putting a maximum limit on it, right?
Oh.
You can't use all patches or all presets because I want you to spend at least a little bit of time on the project messing with the sound and tweaking.
And then we have to use Logic, of course.
Yes. Yeah, for this project, yes. That may change for future projects, but for this one, yes. Questions about that? So when I say maximum of, I believe I said 2 patches or presets, I'm talking about pulling up the patches in the left-hand column because they have all of these things built in, right? Or pulling up a synth or a sampler and pulling up a preset.
Well, we can try, like we can take a preset and then change it a little bit.
Sure.
There would be no anymore preset.
Sure. Yeah, that's actually one of the exercises in the Ableton book. Because it's starting with presets as an initial starting place, but then tweaking them to fine tune them.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the number of options that we have in front of us are handicapping us, right? So it's a way of having a starting place, but then a jumping off point from there. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So.
And how many voices? 4?
Yes.
Okay.
Maximum
I believe I said minimum.
Minimum of
2 minutes in length, a minimum of 4 software instrument tracks, right? Total, right? So if you want drums and you pull up Ultra Beat, that's a software instrument track. That's fine. That's one. It counts as one. Then I say down here, a maximum of 2 MIDI loops, and you can use a maximum of 2 preset. I really mean presets or / patches here, right? So pulling up the preset in the plugin itself, or pulling up the patch in the left-hand library. Either of those counts as a preset or a plugin, or sorry, a patch. Is that clear? Okay. Project should have a clear musical structure. If you can defend that your song has a clear musical structure and that you're writing an ambient piece, I'm okay with that, but you need to be able to defend that.
But if you have to defend it, you're probably not in the right direction.
What I'm saying is lead with it,
Okay.
right? Like I shouldn't have to say like what exactly were you going for here, right? If it's a structure that is a little, experimental or a little bit more out there, a little bit more freeform, and you lead with that, if you're saying it's an ambient piece,
You can't handcuff us, man.
I'm not.
We're trying to be creative.
That's right. Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
just write a song that literally every single.
I want you to think about it, right?
It has to be music, not
Right.
noise.
But there's noise. No.
Right. Well, right, and this is why
I get it.
grading these things can be difficult.
Yeah.
But that's why I set a very
Yeah.
straightforward rubric for I'm not grading you on what I perceive as the quality of what you're doing. I'm grading you on evidence of effort and satisfying the requirements. Right. So if you do what I've asked you to do, and I can see that you've put effort into it, that's what I'm grading you. Pretty clear, yes?
Mm-hmm.
The only things that should be maybe a little bit shaky or MIDI draw, the control parameters, that kind of stuff, right?
So, just a question. I was in here last Monday.
Mhm.
But for continuous or switch controller
Yes.
parameter, what are those? Like,
Yeah, so-
what's the definition?
Continuous controller is something, I mentioned this earlier, something that you're modifying continuously, like a mod wheel or a pitch bend, something that you're able to automate a curve for. A MIDI curve, right? Which we're going to look at today. As opposed to a switch controller, which would be it's on, it's off, right? Like it's off in this section of the song, it's on in this section of the song. You satisfy that.
So it has to be a controller of the MIDI controller.
Well, what I'm referring, it's a little confusing because this is a performance controller,
Right.
right? But MIDI also has continuous and switch controllers, which are part of the MIDI protocol, right? So they're basically the ability to change the velocity of the
Right.
notes
Right.
to make a crescendo,
Yeah.
or like I said, turn on sustain, or do a pitch bend, or do a modulation to open up a filter cutoff, or something like that. Anything that's using something like this, right? A mod wheel or pitch bend is a continuous.
Sorry.
I went to go to the one person who's playing something. Right. This was fun.
That freaked me out. Like, what? That's cool.
Whereas the switch is, I've turned something on, I've turned something off, but it's all MIDI. Okay, we're not talking. None of this is audio. None of this is going to use any audio. There are no audio tracks allowed,
Mhm.
right?
Okay.
At least for this project. Right? We're focusing on MIDI and working with these different MIDI parameters.
Nice. Okay.
You look puzzled.
For example, yes.
Of what?
This is something I did last year. Right?
Okay.
So these would be considered. I'm presuming that all this would be everything that you're asking for.
Yeah, these are MIDI parameters that you automated, correct?
Mhm.
Yes. So those would be continuous controllers.
Okay. I'm not gonna use this.
Okay.
So,
Dixon.
What's this called, Dixon?
oh, this is
Dixon's Dream Musics.
I see a lot of Dixon's music around here.
yeah.
Go to any computer and you'll find a Dixon track.
It's probably true, actually. Questions? Is it basically just the MIDI draw and the controller stuff?
The MIDI draw
Sticky
just
points?
you're gonna show us how
Yes.
to do it, but other than that, yeah.
Cool. So let me dive into a little bit of demo and some stuff. Yeah, Jeff.
I'm just a little bit confused here, looking at the, all right, so we have a minimum of 4 tracks,
Correct.
all right? But then you're saying you may use a maximum of 2 preset patches.
Mhm.
So if I have, so I can understand 2, but, so that's it? I mean, then what is the, how am I gonna get sound out of the other two tracks?
Good. So by starting with the default or starting with a
Oh,
preset
okay.
and then tweaking it.
I see, so
Right.
that, all right.
So you can
that's good.
use.
I can use a Stone Cold 2 of them right out of the box.
Correct.
But anything else I have to tweak a bit.
Correct. Yes.
Got it.
You can either start at factory default and tweak there, or you can
Right.
start with a preset and tweak from there. But
Right.
the rule is you can only use 2 straight up presets.
Yeah, that makes sense to me now.
Cool. Other questions? These are all good questions. So if you have any, please ask.
Editing of individual or multiple MIDI notes.
Yes.
How can you tell if we edit?
What I'm referring to is
Like take the group of notes and then switch maybe the pitch, change the pitch. or
pitch
something.
or velocity, modifying. Maybe taking a melody and changing it.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
So I'm saying you can start. Some people are more innately connected with writing stuff from scratch, whereas some people really like tweaking stuff, right? And I don't want to totally discourage either method, right? So what I'm saying here is you can use a maximum of 2 MIDI loops. So you can use some of the stuff in the loop library in Logic, but I'd like you to. If you're going to do that, I'd like you to do some modification, right? Like I'd like you to modulate something, change velocities, maybe
Yeah.
change the melody a little bit.
Right.
And I'd like you to address, if you do use loops, I'd like you to address and say, here's what I changed.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Basically, I don't want you to
Take
Pull-
loops.
pull up a patch, pull up a preset, pull up another patch, take a loop it for 32 bars, print it, and hand it in.
Yeah.
Right? I want you to tweak stuff. I want you to change stuff. I want you to dig a little bit deeper into the MIDI notes, the MIDI messages, modify some of this stuff.
Mhm.
So even if you're not fully comfortable with writing 4 parts all by yourself without, having a baseline to start from, I want you to at least modify some things along the way.
Right.
Otherwise, you're not going to get
Oh,
a whole lot out of it. Yeah. Not saying that it's not useful to pull up loops and loop them, but
please.
that's not really what I'm looking for you to do.
So no loops.
No, I didn't say that.
Oh, okay.
I said a maximum of 2 loops. But if you're going to use loops, I'd like you to modify, right? So I'd like you to change velocity, maybe change the melody a little bit. Do something with it.
So when you pull out the loops, you have the MIDI notes and then you can work on that.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, you can actually, and again, that's a reason to not use audio loops, right? Because it's audio, which I asked you not to do. But you also can't modify them like MIDI notes. You can modify them, but
Yeah.
Unless you change them into MIDI.
correct.
Correct.
Which I wouldn't be opposed to.
Oh, really?
But the point is, the things that you're changing are going to be MIDI parameters.
Right.
Because that's the stuff I want you to dig into.
Okay. All right.
Thank you for raising that. Okay, so a couple of things. Any other questions before I do some demo stuff? Or more demo? All right. So, a couple of things that I wanted to go over. If you're experiencing any latency from, while you're playing, you can actually, there's a thing in Logic called low latency mode. Anybody ever heard of this?
No.
And it's useful while you're tracking something in MIDI, but then when you go and you want to mix it later, you should turn it off because it could cause issues with the processing. But let me take a look here. Pull it up. If you go into Preferences, Audio, General, you have low latency mode, right? So there's that. There's also your buffer. So under Devices, it'll tell you, right, resulting latency 10.5 milliseconds, round trip 5.3 output, right? So it's telling you if you're hearing latency here, you can actually modify the buffer. 128 is a reasonable buffer for recording MIDI. If you shorten this, it actually shortens the latency. But I wouldn't go all the way to 32 because you might have some processing issues. But if your buffer is up at 1024, it's probably longer than I would recommend if you're recording MIDI. So I would say, everybody with me here?
Yes.
But
So
if you put a very low number, it's gonna take a lot of memory from your laptop.
So it's buffer. Buffer is basically how much stuff it's storing at one time, and keeping in short-term memory, right? So if it's keeping more stuff in short-term memory, then that process of using that short-term, the RAM, can get slowed down. So if you're doing all kinds of additional processing, and you have a smaller buffer, you could have CPU issues. You could have bigger issues when you're mixing. But when you're actually laying a track down, no latency or minimal latency is very important, right? Because if you're playing something
Rhythmically.
and you need precision, low latency. So keep in mind, I would say maybe 256, 128 is a buffer, and
While tracking.
while tracking with MIDI. Yes. And for general, if you want to if it's an issue, you can turn low latency mode on, right? And that will improve things even more.
So what would you suggest if you're just mixing?
If you're mixing, low latency mode should not be on, and the buffer can be longer. You can keep it where it is, and if you run into processing issues and things are moving slowly, up the buffer size at that point. So you shouldn't really have
Or
to mess
just
with.
close other applications.
Yeah, I was gonna say you shouldn't have to mess with buffer too much, but it's something good to keep in mind because if you're tracking in MIDI, it can get annoying if there's bad latency. So that's why I bring it up.
If you have that problem, you go and fix it.
Exactly. You know how to at least address it. So I'll put it on for now because I'll be dealing mostly with MIDI anyways. And make sure if you're going to make a change, you hit apply changes or it won't actually do anything. That's a good tip. We talked a little bit about this last week, right? So tracking with MIDI is just like tracking with anything else. You can get a count off, right? If you go to your preferences and you go to your there's a recording. There it is. Yeah, so project settings, if you go to recording, there's a few things. So the things that are at the top count in by default as 1 bar. You can change that if you like. And then things like pre-roll, right? So how much earlier it's going to start recording before you're supposed to punch in. stuff like that.
What menu is that under?
That is
File.
file project settings.
Okay.
So rather than, so there's logic preferences, which are for universally, and then there's project settings, this specific project.
Okay.
And then under project settings, it would be under recording. But a couple of things you want to keep in mind, and we talked about this briefly last week, think about the tempo, right? Don't just leave it at default and play whatever tempo you want. Because if you want to go and do things like quantize later, modify any of this stuff, use it as a mock-up, add audio to it, add anything else to it, it's going to keep the tempo that you used in your session, but play it back accordingly. So if it's at, say, 120 and you're playing at 80, right, none of your numbers are going to match up. So when it goes to quantize, it's going to quantize to the quarter note at what it thinks the tempo is, rather than what you actually played.
Oh, if in case you don't use the clock.
Correct. I would recommend, and I know not everybody likes these, I would recommend, if you're recording MIDI, recording it to a click track.
Well, yeah.
Well, I mean,
People,
it's not, it's worth saying.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do it and you're not thinking about it, and then you quantize later, the timing will be totally off.
Yeah.
Right. So then you can play it at any tempo, and then you can record it at another tempo.
Exactly. If you go and speed it up later,
Right.
the quantization things will still be accurate,
Right.
as opposed to it calculating the difference between the perceived tempo or the session tempo and the tempo you actually played.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a very important. It seems like a minor thing, but it's very important. In addition to, so we have the tempo up here, the master session tempo. So if I turn on the click here, it's a little metronome in purple, and I hit play, it plays at our master tempo. If I bump this up, right, it bumps it up. And if I want to look at my automation lanes, there's a little drop down above the top track. It says show hide global tracks. We can also bring tempo up there. Right, so if you want to program a tempo change, you can say at bar 5, we start at 117, but at bar 5, I want to program, a change up to 125. That's something that you can do through curves. Maybe if it's more dramatic, it's easier to. Right, so you have the ability to think about tempo and the scale of the whole song. And that's stuff that you should be thinking about early on as much as possible.
How did you pull out that?
There's a little drop down. You get these lanes out of here. When you're in this view, there's a little arrow. Show hide global tracks. Global tracks include markers, right? Time signature, tempo. So there's some useful stuff in here.
Right.
If I, a couple things that are important to keep in mind too. There's loop playback, which we talked about this a little bit. In Logic, if you click above the ruler, above the ticks in the ruler on the actual numbers for bars, you get a little yellow line.
Yeah, that's annoying sometimes. I click it by accident when I'm trying to just move the cursor.
Right.
It just starts leaving.
So the important thing is if you want to move the playhead, click in the actual ticks.
Yeah.
If you want to set loop playback, click on the actual numbers. Right? So it's minor and
It's
there's
different than Pro Tools. That's
yeah.
If you've been using Pro Tools for a year straight and not using Logic, but that was my problem last year with Pro Tools. I was just using Logic. So
Welcome to this year.
relearning.
That's right. It's important that we are skilled in multiple environments.
Yeah, when you
Right.
can afford multiple environments in your one laptop. That's the thing.
Well, it's
Memory, yeah.
the more stuff you know, the more marketable you are too. I'm not doing it because I don't like you.
I'm still wondering.
You're still wondering, huh?
Just kidding, just kidding.
Just consider yourself lucky that I'm not saying, all right, we're gonna do software instruments in Pro Tools, but we don't have any sample packs.
Yeah, I was about to say that's book.
Yeah,
Except that
it's
one
very
like
good fun.
piano that's always in Pro Tools. That's it.
Logic's got a lot more, and Live too have a lot more out of the box for that kind of stuff. So that's why some people call them the performers DAW or stuff like that, where it's more easily plug and play, right? You can plug in a MIDI controller and get more sounds quickly, as opposed to Pro Tools being a little bit more technically having hurdles to jump through. Let's see what we got here. So a couple of things that are good to think about. So if let's see. Bring this down. Maybe we'll go with something a little more subtle than that. Okay, so I'm going to completely remove the plugin, right? And I'm going to disable all these things, the patch setup. And I'll do something simple. The EXS24, we talked about this a little bit last week, is the sampler, the stock sampler for Logic, right? So the main software sampler. So I'm going to pull up a preset here. Acoustic pianos. Doesn't really matter. Okay, so this is a sampled Yamaha grand piano. And I'm going to right, something very simple that didn't really stay with the rhythm at all, but this is good. It gives us the opportunity to play with quantization and all kinds of stuff. So we have a couple things. If I go up to the event editor, right, so there's a little list icon up here in the top right. And it can be a little crazy to look at, right? But the idea is that it's showing us all of the MIDI messages that are getting sent of many different kinds, right? So the only messages that I really did there were note messages. I wasn't doing any mod wheel or any pitch bend or any of that stuff. But this is good to keep in mind, because if we want to go in and look at an individual note, right? If I can scroll through every single note that I played that way. But if I want to go and modify something on the note level or a group of notes, right, I can shift select and I can modify some things in here. So
Let's go.
that's really useful.
Yes,
So-
it is.
I never thought about that.
Jesus.
That least always scared me. I don't want to even see that.
Where did you
So-
get that from again? From events?
It's just the little thing that looks like a bullet list in the top right corner.
That guy.
That's it's the event editor, right? And it's just looking at every MIDI event. And a couple things to keep in mind. So position, right? It leads with where you started playing, right? The type of message that it is. So when it happened, what type it is, what channel it went out on. Of course, now I'm changing the channel. And if it's a note message, it's looking at pitch, right? And then we have velocity. And then we have the duration, right? So this can be useful. There's different ways of skinning the same cat, right? So this is a visual way of looking at the numerical information about the note. I can also double click the MIDI region and pull up the piano roll.
Bodies.
And just so you know, you can change the height of this. So if you're working with a lot of MIDI stuff, you can just raise this up so you can see a lot more. It will only show a region that you have selected. So I have nothing selected in the piano roll. Sorry, nothing selected in my regions here. It won't show me anything in my piano roll. When I select this, it then pulls up the region. So you can tell that my timing was pretty awful here. So let's see. A couple things I can do. For tracking, you have some different options, right? So say you're looping playback, right? And you want to do multiple takes, right? There's a few different options. If I go in and I set up loop playback, and let's see, and I hit record. Where are we at? Okay, and wait, okay. Okay, again, my timing's off. But when I start over again and I play, so say I'm going to do this again. Right? It's going to just play over what I already have, and it's going to just add the notes, and it's going to become a giant mess, right? So how to avoid that? Well, if you go into... There's a couple different options. If you do new track with same instrument, right? You can actually mute one, right, and leave the other one live and do another take, something like that. That can get a little bit tedious because you have to do it every time. But you can actually go in and go into your recording settings again. So if I go back to where we were, recording settings, overlapping recordings, cycle, no cycle. Cycle means loop playback, right? So if I'm in loop playback and I want to do multiple takes, it's defaulting to merge, right? Which means it's going to merge all the MIDI notes, which is not really ideal. You have a couple different options. So if you do create tracks and mute, this is kind of cool. So this, first of all, it's important to keep in mind there's one thing for you, there's a setting for MIDI and a setting for audio, right? So if you're recording MIDI, it's important to keep in mind what the setting is set at for MIDI. So if I go back in now that I've made this change, right, and let me just make this region a little bit shorter so you get an idea. All right, so what's it doing here?
It's creating a new track every time it loops.
Good. So it's actually muting them, but you can go in and there's actually a command for it, Control M, or you can right click it and mute or unmute, right? So if it's grayed out like this, the MIDI region is muted. But you can create multiple passes and it will create multiple channels every time you do a take.
Nice, that's nice.
There's also, which is useful, there's also another mode that I love.
Because you can take the best take that you do.
Or you can do comping, right? So you can say my first half from this take, my second half from this take.
That was just a little confusing as to how you got there.
Okay, let me do it again. So this is back in...
That's another thing, like on Pro Tools, that's one button here, but on here it's a little slightly different.
I gotcha. I hear you. So if you go to File, Project Settings, Recording. So just the settings that have to do with your tracking, right? And then if you look at MIDI, create tracks and mute, it's just going to create a new track every time and mute them, and then you have to unmute the one that you want to listen to.
Wait. Shit. Am I blind? Oh, okay, recording. Okay.
Yep, file, project settings,
It might just come up as a different name.
recording.
Thingy off, thingy on.
You see what I mean? Like mine
What's
a
going
bit different. Mine, I don't know, maybe I have like an older version. or something.
Recording. Oh,
Yeah,
overlapping
cycle
recording.
off,
So where it says
on.
join when cycling.
Okay. Yeah.
If you do create tracks and mute when cycling, I think you're right. I think this is actually a newer version of
Cycle on,
Logic 10.
cycle off.
Okay, you can.
Me
Um,
or yours?
yours.
Okay. Sorry.
Create track and mute when cycling. So what that's going to do is keep in mind cycling is just loop playback,
Yeah.
right? So that's just saying every time it loops, it's going to create a new track.
Cool.
But with the same channel, right? So
Yeah.
you can keep playing and not have to worry about having to change channels.
Got you. And then the mute part, because I've done that before too, where you try to record over something and it'll play it back.
Right.
So the mute part mutes it.
Right.
Cool.
There's another thing in Logic 10 that's really great, which are take folders. Has anyone messed with these before?
What's the name?
Take folders.
Take photo.
Create tracks and mute. So let me change that to create take folder, and we'll try this again. Maybe I'll pep this up because I don't want to leave you waiting here forever while I play. What's up?
Take folder, not create. Yeah, okay.
Create take folder, right? So take folder, you'll see what that does in a moment, but that's for MIDI.
Not really. We're just.
Right? And if I hit stop, what happens? First of all, I went into score view, which you didn't,
Nice.
it wasn't intentional. There's a little drop down arrow, and I can see all of them.
Okay.
And I can toggle and say, I want to listen to take one, I want to listen to take two, and it mutes the other ones, which is really handy. And if you know you did better on one take, right, you can go in and then you can create a comp. If you go in here and you do unpack, it takes them and creates separate tracks and mutes one, right? So it does the other thing, but doing the take folder is a nice thing to do while you're tracking so that you can go back in later and then unpack what you want to unpack.
Right.
These are just things that make tracking a little bit quicker and easier. Let's see. Another thing that's kind of cool, so there's a lot of things that are hidden in Logic, that if you control click on the toolbar, first of all, did anybody know that if you go to the toolbar and you see this little downward arrow and you click and drag down, you actually open up like a little lower toolbar here?
I did that for the first time yesterday. I still don't know what the hell it is.
That's one of those things that, like, it was a pretty poor design, because if you don't know it's there, there's nothing that clues you into the fact that it's actually there
Right.
until you actually try it. But it's interesting to know because you can jump around and do some things pretty quickly, and you can actually customize this by control clicking and do customize, right? You have different options that you can add in here. One of which I'm going to do, if I can find it. Actually, you know what? I'm going to add it to the top here, because it's a little confusing. The very top is called the control bar, right? And this is called the toolbar. So everybody's got a different name for stuff. If I go to the control bar and I add capture, where is it at? First of all, there's a toggle for low latency mode, so you can turn it on and off. That's kind of handy. Hey,
So late.
it's okay.
Everybody.
That's it, bro.
Capture recording. There it is. Transport, capture recording. Does anybody know about this feature? This is another amazing feature. Every time you play something, when you hit play, say, and you're playing along to a metronome, right? And just hitting play. I mean, you probably do this all the time. You're messing with the sound. You're auditioning it. Do I like this? Right, and I'm like, I don't know if I like that. When I hit stop, it actually captured what you just did in a buffer. So it's kind of a silly thing because you could just hit you could hit record everything and delete what you don't like. But this capture as recording, if I click that, it gives me a MIDI region of what I just played. So the important thing to know about that is it has a buffer of between the time where you hit play and where you hit stop. So if you hit play again and you're playing to a metronome, it gets rid of the old buffer. And it also,
But you can save it.
yeah, so it saves it as a MIDI region. So if I hit this,
Is there?
correct, it's actually a MIDI region. And that's, I have two thoughts on this. It's kind of cool, but at the same time, you know, there's that philosophy, even if you don't know that you're recording or you don't want to record, sometimes it's best to just hit record, noodle around, and that way you have everything that you did.
But when you record, it's more a particular situation. Like sometimes when you're recording, you can't change settings and stuff.
Right. Right.
At least I don't know with Logic, but with Ableton Live for sure.
Right.
When I'm recording, there are things that I can touch. With that, you can do whatever you want.
The important thing to know is that it only works while the transport is moving. So if you hit play and actually get a transport moving, it remembers what you play. If you're just playing without the transport on, without the click track, it does not remember it.
What is that called again?
Capture as recording. So if you go into your control bar settings, customize control bar and display, it's called capture recording. You can also do it by hitting Shift and R. So if you play something and that was really awesome, you hit Shift R, it'll put it up as a MIDI region for you. By the way, you can do this in loop playback too. So if you do it in loop playback and you play a bunch of stuff and it just keeps going around and around and around and around, it'll automatically, if you recall the capture as recording, it'll make it a takes folder. So that can be really useful. Now there's a new thought, right? And that's one way to do Omni mode. If you have two pieces of software open at the same time and they're both taking input, and one has one sound and one has another, I would put both of them at the same time.
You have to
Sounds
have
cool.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, you might need a little bit of RAM to do that, but
This is fine.
that's a cheat code, right? Another thing that's useful, if you click the type of display for your transport, so to the left of your bar beat division tick, right? If you click that and choose custom, this can be a really useful display because it's telling us if we're getting MIDI in. It also can set the division, right? So when I go and quantize, if I want to default the grid to a 16th note, I can set it to 16th. If I want to default it to quarter, I can default it to quarter. And everything that I view in the session, that'll be its grid that it snaps to. So
Yeah.
that
I
particular
just-
step?
No, I wanted if you could. I was in here for like 10 minutes, I guess. So I missed so much. No, I think what I really want to go. I want you to, if you could go back to the creating a track folder.
Yes,
take
take folder.
A tape folder, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I don't like to erase.
Yeah.
What I've done.
Yeah. So basically, the best way to do it is set loop playback,
Yeah.
right? So I'm going to just do a new section over here.
Okay.
And
The keys too?
not very well. Right. If I stop it,
Okay.
I get a little drop down of all the takes that I did.
Okay.
And the way to make sure that you're actually doing that is if you go to the File menu and Project Settings and Recording, underneath Overlapping Recordings. Basically, overlapping recordings means what does it do when I have one region there already and I start recording over it, right? And I can either merge it, replace it. It can do, if I change it to create tracks and mute, it will create a new track every time by default. If I do a take folder, I get that little drop down. And the take folder is nice because it's hideable, right? You can select the take that you want, right? And then hide the others.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep.
So file.
So let's save the trouble of cutting whatever mistake you made and re-recording.
Exactly. And you can comp them too, right? So, meaning composite. Composite is like, mixing a little bit of one take with a little bit of another. So if you go and click in here and hit unpack, right, we have both of our takes here. We can say, okay, I want to use the first half of this take, right, and the second half of this take, and unmute this, right? Now, you might have to do a little bit of fancier editing to get the MIDI notes that overlap back in. See how it didn't hang on with some of them. So you might have to overlap a little bit, but that's a way that you can composite MIDI regions together.
What if I merge the two tracks together? That would help.
Well, so the scary thing about merge is you don't want to merge everything,
Right.
right? So what I would do is composite them like this,
Yeah.
and then go in and merge them together.
Okay.
But be careful with doing that too soon, right? Usually you can tweak things to create a composite. To create a composite that you like. If you then go in and go to functions. Join regions, right? That will create one region out of the two. So that's one way to comp it, right? So, I like my first half of take one, my second half of take two. Let me cut off those regions and then merge them, and then fix any of the notes at the middle point. That's one way to do that. You want to save yourselves as much work as possible when you're doing that stuff. Okay, so questions on any of this?
You're recording all this, right?
I am actually, yes. But you should pay attention.
No, I am. It's just confusing as hell sometimes.
I know. There's a lot of like, go to this menu. And do
Yeah.
this. I get it.
You know what it is? Logic is a lot on one screen at the same time. Like, I just pulled up two of the screens you had up there, and I felt claustrophobic. So I just stopped and I just kept looking.
This is why-
And even then, there's just a lot of things up there.
This is why a lot of people have multiple displays, and they're like, "I'm gonna have the piano roll on here." If you're doing a bunch of MIDI, right, it could be really useful to have that event editor and its own part of the screen the whole time So at any moment you can go zip to it and make the changes that you want.
Dude, that's
Maybe piano roll in another area.
That's really all it is, because this is just two
Real
tracks. Imagine if there's
Right.
like 4 or 5.
Right.
Like that's,
Well, they do this linked content stuff, right? Where it only shows what you have selected, so that helps. But it's nice to sometimes look only at what you're doing as much as possible to focus. So I understand.
both ways.
Right. That helps too.
More money.
Yes, true. Though you can find cheap ones, and they do.
Find old TVs.
Yep, or just old VGA monitors that people like give like sell them on Craigslist, or people are practically throwing them away right now.
You gotta get the VGA to HDMI
Or Thunderbolt.
Thunderbolt.
Yeah.
something like
You asked if there's any more questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that a yes?
Is there anything else that you can
Is there anything? Of course there is.
do?
What kind of questions? I'm kidding.
Lord have mercy, man. You just did it all.
There's that I can do. I thought you meant that we can do in Logic. I was like, we can do plenty of things.
I know a lot of this, a lot of yeah. So you said as far as the patches, I can go from I can go get a sync that was preset, and as long as I tweak that.
You can use a maximum of 2 stock patches or presets. Beyond that, you can start with a preset or a patch. We have to modify some parameters.
How do you just start with it? How do you just start with it?
If you pull up a preset or a patch and then you open up the software instrument and modify some of the parameters. And I understand that you might not know how all of the pieces of it, like if it's a synth or something like that, it might be a little bit of a struggle to figure out what all these things do.
But you might I know.
What software instrument do you have open?
I have a synthesizer open.
Which one?
I have an electronic piano.
Okay, so I just want to demo for everybody because I think it's useful because that way I'm not.
Oh, okay.
You hear me?
I see it.
Yeah, so even if I pull up a patch, if I then pull up the plugin and start messing with some of this stuff, right? Some of these are pretty simple. Some of them are much more complex, right?
It doesn't matter what, as long as you tweak with it.
Right, and then be able to kind of, don't just randomly say, I turned off the chorus because I had to change something, right? No, like shape it to what you want. Don't use that as like I changed this because you said I had to.
For
Right.
aesthetic purpose.
Correct. Defend it. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we'll have to explain which ones we tweak.
Yeah.
We're gonna write a paper on this.
You're doing a presentation. I want you to talk about the changes that you made and why you made them.
Okay.
Yes. I can look a little bit more at that stuff
And
tonight
Matt
before we
took all
leave.
of
Just
that.
say like,
otherwise-
what am I looking for you to present on? That kind of stuff. So.
Like this is not a patch, right?
Well,
It's kind of confusing.
so anything that's over in the left-hand library here.
I
Is
don't
it-
understand
Good job.
why they organize
Why they're what?
why they organize everything like this. I don't see the sense of putting like why for certain things I need to go in the library and for other things which are still instruments I need to go here.
Basically, to be quite frank with you, the reason that they
It's
loaded
confusing.
patches was so that you could get a specific sound pretty quickly, right? So a lot of people, and again, it's called the performer's DAW for a reason, right? To be able to pull the thing up and get a sound that you're looking for as quickly as possible is really useful. So patches are like, these are sounds that people have programmed because they like the overall sound and they think it's achieving something aesthetically out of the box, right? And that might include a pedal board, it might include delay, reverb, right? It might include all distortion, all kinds of stuff, right? So most of those patches are a software instrument plugin with a bunch of effects.
Right.
That's a patch. And it's called a patch because you're actually plugging the source into an effect, and another effect, and another effect, and you're bussing it, and you're doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
But you can bring all of it up quickly.
Right.
Whereas a preset is just, I opened the electric piano software instrument, and I, brought up, the lead preset or whatever. Right? This is the preset I use, and this is what I turned off. This is what I was modifying.
But why the electric piano is not a patch?
because because there's not all kinds of other baggage in with it, right? Like they're not routing the electric piano through a delay and a reverb and all this
Right.
other stuff. These patches, the vast majority of them are routed to a bunch of effects,
Okay.
right? A software instrument by itself is a software instrument and it has presets, but it might not
It
have
doesn't
all
go
of those
through all
effects linked to it that are trying to aesthetically achieve this thing, right?
It's really what's on the software instrument itself that you can adjust. So whatever knob that's on that software instrument, on a preset, you can change the preset through those. As opposed, you're not adding any,
Right.
any distortion.
Correct.
stuff like
But
that.
those patches, so to have a patch, one of those patches, they starting from one of these software instruments.
Yes.
So they're from that
Correct.
one. It's not like I have two.
No, they're
bag
not-
of
yeah.
instruments, another bag.
It is a little confusing, but no, they're all so Logic has a whole bag, one big bag of software instruments,
Yeah.
right?
Those that go through like effects and stuff, they go in patches.
Right.
Okay.
Those that are just called up as a software instrument by itself without effects are software instruments, but they're not patches with all these layers of effects.
That's the first thing that confused me about that. When I started, I was like, why have some
Right.
instruments? in
They
one?
do it to try to make things easier,
Yeah.
but
Okay,
that
that makes sense.
that was a design choice that
Right.
has mixed results.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes.
So with the after you set up the create take folder, how
Yes.
can you save it? Can you save the what you just did?
The tracks that you recorded?
Not the tracks, but let's say that you open a new file.
What do you mean new file?
Let's say you open a new project,
Yes.
but do you want to keep whatever changes you've made?
So you're saying bring in the MIDI region that you recorded in one project into another project?
Oh no. So I set up the project as in whatever I make a take,
Mhm.
I have a take folder,
Right.
regardless.
Yeah.
So, and I wanna if we do another project, and I don't want to go through the whole process of looking for the take folder.
Yes,
and all that.
yes.
How do I save that?
And actually, when you make a change and you apply it,
Right.
it's going to default to whatever you previously chose
Okay.
until somebody overrides it.
Okay.
Right? These are shared computers, so I would always check. Right? But if you do it, if you have your own computer, right, and you make that change, it's going to save that as the default.
All right.
It's a good question. Yeah.
I'm kind of late, so
Okay.
What kind of do we have an assignment?
Yeah. So there's a project, and I'll pull it up one more time here. You guys are going to be working on it.
Everything is recorded.
Okay, so just compose a musical piece at least 2 minutes in length with only software-based instruments, no audio tracks. A minimum of 4 software instrument tracks used in the project. It should include a variety of advanced MIDI concepts, including performance controllers, right? So you play a controller, MIDI draw, which we're going to look at in just a moment. Use of continuous or switch control parameters, right? So mod wheel, pitch bend would be continuous control. Things like sustain would be a switch control because it's on or off. An editing of individual and multiple MIDI notes. So going into the piano roll, right? If you're going to use like a loop, for instance, you should go in and either change some of the velocity or change the key, change the melody a little bit, but the arc of the melodic curve. Anything like that is fair game. You may use a maximum of 2 MIDI loops, but again, you should be modifying something about them if you're using them. I can write that a little bit more explicitly in this description, but you should. Basically, what I'm looking for you to do is not pull stock sounds or stock loops and loop it the whole time or play this. You know what I mean? I'm trying to get you to mess with the parameters just to understand what they're doing. And a maximum of 2 presets or patches, which are what we were just talking about. Presets are the left-hand library stuff versus presets. Sorry, patches are the left-hand library stuff. Presets are inside of a software instrument, the options that come up as preset options.
So one thing is, so you mess with the preset or the patch, right? Saving that. Can you save those?
As a preset itself? Or as, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, so when I go back into the software, I have that same sound you know, I don't have to retweak it.
So if you save your project, it will save any
Save that
modifications
settings.
you've made.
Okay.
If you really love the tweak that you did and want to use it in other projects, you can save it as its own preset.
Preset.
And you can call it Joe's Hummin' Wurlitzer.
Yeah,
Right? You know, and-
that's it now. All right.
Alright?
Question. This is weird. And maybe
That's
it's
not a
just
question.
my. Oh yeah, there we go. It's a statement. That's a
That
statement.
is a statement.
Question.
What the
This
hell
is
is
weird.
this? Because this
Images
is just.
or sets you are trying to import were created with a newer version of MIDI or Logic and cannot be imported. Where are you importing from?
I'm not importing nothing. I just went to
So what are you importing?
patches, and I went to synth,
Mhm.
I went
That's
to
it.
bass, and
Mhm.
that's it.
What did you import and create with a newer version? I would update your Logic.
Okay.
That should solve that.
So Jay, just wanted to know.
Double negatives. The educator in you. Right?
Does that make no sense? That says something like that.
I'm not.
Not learning
I'm
nothing.
not downloading nothing.
Yeah.
Not
Oh,
downloading
yeah.
nothing.
Sorry.
You're affirming that you are.
That's it.
I am downloading something then, right? Sorry.
English, please.
English.
Press 1 for
Oh, yeah,
English.
Got an update right there.
Okay,
Should probably update it.
MIDI draw. Let's take a look at MIDI draw. So I have a region.
Bro, a quick question.
Yeah.
How do you get the MIDI, the keyboard to be the piano?
It's called musical typing.
That's it.
So under Window, do show musical typing.
Ooh.
For the purposes of the project, I prefer that you use a controller, but
Yeah.
but for the moment, that's cool. I hear you.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
But if you get yourself one of those X keys, it doesn't matter, right? You can do it in the subway if you want.
I
There you
know.
go.
All right, so let's check it out. So I'm gonna turn on cycling, right? Loop playback, and this is. So that was not one of my finer moments. You know what I'll do? I will try to find something that's actually in time. Nope, that's not either.
Can you quantize it? Did you quantize
I can. I didn't. Yeah. No, this is just totally raw right now. So, thanks, Tony.
Sorry.
That's fairly close to being on time. So we'll start there. And so MIDI draw, we have the ability to do draw on in the piano roll, right? Or we can do it on the region itself. So what do I mean by that? If I go to, again, double-clicking, double-clicking brings, in score as well, yes. Double-clicking a region opens up piano roll by default, right? And then I can select a series of notes here. So if I start at the beginning, right? And I want to do something with that. I can select the notes that I want to modify, right? If I go into, it's not a very articulate icon, but it looks like dots with lines coming out the sides of them. They're supposed to look like onsets and then regions, like MIDI regions. It's called MIDI draw. And by default, it brings up velocity. But you can bring up all kinds of stuff, right? So we have some things that are continuous, some things that are switches, right? Like sustain, breath, right? But if I go in here, what is this doing exactly? Let's take a look. So all of those individual blue regions are MIDI notes, right? But they're not. You're not visualizing it quite in the same way. You're visualizing something that you can modify, right? So if I want to change, for instance, do a crescendo, right? I can, by default, it's doing velocity, right? So I could try to ramp up the velocity so that I create a crescendo, right? If I start with a quiet velocity and then go to a louder velocity, it'd sound like a crescendo. So if I go here and use my zoom controls to zoom out a little bit, and it's literally this simple click and draw a line from beginning to end. That's interesting because you're like, oh, that looks like the pitch is changing, but what it's showing you is whatever parameter you're editing. So this is actually the velocity that's changing. So if I go back in here, it's a little funky note in there, but you get the idea, right? So it's you can modify a number of parameters through just drawing these shapes and drawing these lines.
Could you do that one more time?
Of course. So you select a region, you go into this MIDI draw functionality here, right? And we get this pop-up in which we can select a number of things, right? So we have, it defaults to velocity, but you could do a number of things. You could do pitch bend, right? And you could choose something that you want to bend. Of course, I just selected all of those notes, so it's going to bend all of them, so it might not be ideal in that sense, but this is just a quick and dirty job here. So for this one,
It's like automation.
it's like an automation curve for MIDI. Yeah, so if I start, for pitch bend, 0 is no change to the pitch, right? 31, any positive value is pitch up, any negative value is pitch down, right? So it won't be ideal to do this across multiple notes, so I'm just gonna not even try. But what I will do is I'll select a section and automate that. So if I go in here and choose, I'm going to turn off the click for now. Maybe at the end, I'll do a little pitch drop. All right, so if I program in, I select these notes at the end, pitch bend, right, and add a little node here. It lines up vertically, right? So the onset of the note is where that line is. So you'll know kind of how to line things up in that way. So it's going to drop the pitch pretty quickly and pretty drastically. So let's give that a listen. Right, which maybe wasn't as sensual or subtle as I would have liked, but that's because I went a little bit fast and a little bit far, right? These are things that you can nuance a little bit. Yeah.
So if you're doing a string arrangement for like pop music, and
Yes.
you want to emulate that drop.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Exactly.
Okay.
Interpolate this information and apply it to whatever you would like. Yes. Very good. So keep in mind you can do this with any of these parameters, right? So there's some smart control stuff in here where you can use it to modify effects, which are kind of fun. Volume automation, right, which is essentially velocity automation, but it's a little different, right? Volume automation is a continuous controller, whereas velocity is the velocity of that individual note message. Oftentimes I find that depending on what you're doing, velocity automations to create crescendo, decrescendo is a little bit more convincing than a volume automation. Because it sounds like you just turned them up or turned them down rather than you're playing harder or you're playing softer.
Okay.
But it also depends on the quality of the sample or the instrument that you're using. So these are some of the things that I'd like you to modify in the MIDI draw stuff, right? So this is MIDI draw inside of the piano roll, but you can also do MIDI draw in here. What's the difference, you say? I will show you, I say.
What's smart?
Sorry?
It said smart?
Where did it say smart?
Up on that, above 21,
Above 21.
what's that?
Oh, snap.
Oh,
So snap to the. So it says it's saying smart. In other words, they're saying it'll use the algorithm that tries to automatically determine where it needs to snap, as opposed to you telling.
Okay.
Smart snap, as opposed to hey, snap to a quarter note,
I got it.
which doesn't always work well, right? This is quantization stuff. So that's a whole other ballgame, which we can discuss in a minute. But that's snap to the division that I set up here is the default. But I can also set, if I want to snap to the division here, I can do that, or I can choose a different level. But we can look at quantization a little bit more in a moment. Let's see. Let's take a look. And in tracks. Problem is they've done so many updates to the software that they've like slightly relocated where some of these things are. So there we go. So if I select a region, so there's MIDI draw and then there's automation, right? If I hit A, right, I can bring up automation much like you'd expect to see a regular automation curve. And you can change a few basic things like pan or volume, right? Which this is just a volume automation. So plugging this in and then programming a volume automation will process the audio like I said, as opposed to processing the velocity of the MIDI notes. That wasn't exactly convincing because I played a little softer at the end anyways, but you get the idea. So for MIDI draw, if I go to view, MIDI draw, I have to select a region first. There we go. So I can draw in some of these parameters. So say I want to do modulation. Whoop. Don't move. Sorry, just give me a moment. It's not showing it for some reason here. There we are. Now we can see it a little bit better. So you might want to mess with your zoom settings so you can see. So it's visualizing the draw on top of the region itself, as opposed to looking in through the piano roll, right? And you can do different things like auto define actually toggles through different things that you might be changing, right? So I know I did that pitch bend at the end and it picked that up by going to auto define, right? So let's turn that off and play here. Right, so pick that up in the end. If I want to go in and change something else, MIDI draw. I can select something else that I want to do MIDI draw for. So if I do modulation, and then go in and I want to draw here, I can create this curve, and let's hear what this sounds like. Let's not start with it though.
Oh, that's how you do it.
So you create a node and then drag it to get a change.
How you make the how you call it, the straight and the diagonal line. I see.
So for different instruments, the modulation can do slightly different things. So that's something to think about. Electric piano, it's tremolo. So you'll notice a little change in the tremolo when I draw in a change like that. If you do a lot of synths, it's filter cutoff, which is kind of fun because you can draw in a little filter cutoff change automatically through MIDI draw. If I go into another thing I wanted to show you. Curve tool. Edit. There it is. So there's different tools in here. So there's a primary tool and a secondary tool. And what that means is primary tool is whatever you do with a primary click will be the default tool. If you change this other one on the right, it'll be a secondary tool. So it's like right-clicking or secondary clicking.
That doesn't apply to your laptop, does it?
Well, two-finger clicking on a trackpad or control clicking is the same as right-clicking.
Gotcha.
Alright.
So it still works. By default, it's usually two-finger click, but that is a trackpad setting that you'll want to look at because it might have been turned off. If you go in and change this, there's some cool tools in here. If I go to the automation curve tool, I can actually create a curve here. So by dragging, I can create kind of an S curve or more of a parabolic or exponential curve, which depending on what you're doing, that can be a pretty quick way. Rather than writing in individual changes for nodes, you can just draw in a curve quickly. That can be really useful.
And then just tack on a parameter that you want to modify.
Well, of course, yes. So you'd have to make sure that what you're doing in MIDI draw is, so to check, you go to View, MIDI draw, and this is what you're changing, right? So currently I drew in this change in modulation. If I wanted to draw this change in say, sustain pedal, which it's not going to be exactly a curve because
It's just like off, on, off.
because it's on off. Right? And so it's saying,
Like 127.
right, there's a couple options. But you can draw that in, and then I wonder if it'll let me do that. Generally, it's only for continuous controllers. Anything that's a switch, it's only on or off, so there's not really any expression that you can gain from doing that.
Right.
Let me go to something that's continuous. MIDI draw, say volume, right? If I go in and draw in a volume change, and I'm like, okay, I want to start there and end there, but I don't want it to be a linear fade, right? I want it to come out quickly at the end. I can go in and use my automation curve tool, click and drag, right? And it'll create a little curve for me. turn my little sustain on there. That was a little eerie. But you can mess with these things. You can fine tune them. Questions about any of that? I know it's a lot.
It is.
Yeah. I was just amazed at
I captured it all.
stuff like
Fantastic. See now.
See that?
That'll be for next week. It's like, what did he say?
Right.
When does this project due, Professor?
It's due our next class, but our next class is not a week from. Well, it's next week is totally off.
So the week after.
So it's the 27th. No, it's 2 weeks from 2 days ago.
Wait,
Right.
oh, wait.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Two.
Next Wednesday is a Wednesday schedule.
Yeah.
Regular Wednesday.
Correct.
Yeah, this Monday we don't have school.
Correct.
Right.
It's President's Day.
Lincoln's
So-
birthday was Monday.
Was Monday.
That was the person.
Yes.
Yeah.
My Wednesdays suck, man.
Wednesday is Monday.
Yes.
Wednesday is
This
Sunday.
week.
Psychology, bro.
But then next week, Wednesday is Wednesday, and there's no school Monday.
Okay. Do we know lab availability now? Some of us do not have Logic.
Understood.
But this time actually
I do not know definitively. I don't believe this is up to date. Oh, it's spring 2017.
Oh, great.
So, Monday 10 to 5, Wednesday 10 to 5, Friday 10 to 5, Saturday 12 to 5.
Saturday, 12
Monday, 10 to 5.
What's
What's your
Tuesday and
favorite-
Thursday?
Tuesday and Thursday.
Closed on Tuesday and Thursday.
What?
So that,
No, there might be someone here during
so that means you're gonna have to
Yeah,
interrupt
probably
the
have to-
class.
like 12 is it 12 to 2 or
Yeah.
what
was Friday?
club hours, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Pretty
Which
much
Friday?
gonna have to interrupt the class basically.
You should not be interrupting classes.
But
Friday is 10 to 5.
10 to 5.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday 10 to 5, Saturday 12 to 5.
All right.
10 to 5, so I'll be here.
well, are there classes here on this time? So I'm sure there are.
So there are no other classes, right?
Those it says
That's open lab.
this is open lab.
Right.
So there should not be classes during those times.
Right.
So likely what's going on is Tuesdays and Thursdays are the class heavy days. So that's why they close it down.
Okay.
Oh,
But then you could beg the teacher to let you in, you know?
You can. If you have headphones, you can do some work maybe.
okay.
I will reach out to Wes and figure out if there's any deviations from that schedule and let you all know.
Very good.
The only other thing, I think this is it, that I wanted to show you a little bit was quantization, right? Which we touched on this a little bit last week. See how I programmed in my little S curve there so I can see the change when I go back to the standard view?
Oh, yeah.
So quantization. So if I go in here, open up my piano roll.
You draw. Maybe there's a curve. Maybe you have tools. Yeah, no, tools.
I can do a couple things here. Quantization, we talked about this last week, it's a double-edged sword, right? Like you don't want to be too robotic, but you also don't want to be too wrong.
Gonna be right in between.
Right, it's a balance, it's a tight balance, right? So there's a lot of ways that you can do quantization. You can do main region quantization, right? So if I go in here to quantize, if I have my region selected, right? So what do I mean by that? I go in, click on my MIDI region, double click it, opens up the piano roll, go to, in the left-hand column, there's a little track drop down for the region.
Yep.
Turn quantization on
Alright.
to the level that I want to quantize to, which was not really a grammatically correct sentence. But if you want to quantize to a 16th note, select 16th note and it's going to snap it. Keep in mind that is region-wide, so everything in that region will quantize to a 16th note.
And you could pick just a specific note to quantize.
You
as well.
you can pick a specific note to quantize. To do that, though, you'd probably want to go in to the region itself and select the note, and then select in here
Yeah.
the level of quantization you want to do, swing, strength, all of this stuff, hit Q, and it will only snap that one note you've selected.
Yeah.
If you want to do the whole region, you can do it at once. Keep in mind that that doesn't mean that it has to sound robotic. right? So if I go into 16th note and I choose there's different levels of swing in here, right? So the higher up the letters go, the more swung it is, right? So swing F is very swung, which I don't think that's really a word, but that didn't really play.
So whatever you want to change, by how much?
Maybe the sustain is making it.
Yeah, it might be messing with it a little bit. There's also things like Q strength, which for some reason is not turning on for me here. There it is. So if I do, there's something called Q strength, which basically says how much do you want the quantization to correlate with the grid versus how you originally played it, which is a really useful tool, right? So Q strength, if I go 100%, hold on, not range, strength.
Oh, well, it's right there. It's there.
Yep, if I go 20%, right? That's saying that will abide by the quantization 20%, right? So it'll be 20% quantized, which is probably a little bit low. You probably want around 80 or so, because it's enough humanity to not sound robotic. But it really kind of depends on your performance and what you have. So around 80, a little over 80 can be useful, but too much beyond that, it can sound robotic. So I did all kinds of MIDI draw stuff in there. So you play with that a little bit. We have the ability to, stick strictly to the quantization, and you can, or not, and kind of balance in between how you played it and how you want to quantize it. Similarly, you can do that with velocity. So velocity, you can try to stick it to exactly like you played it, or try to, it has actually stores like what it calls groove templates, which might be one of the coolest terminologies in Logic, / most ambiguous. But basically, you can try to, the lower the number, the more it correlates to what you did, right? The higher the number, the higher it correlates to what it's perceiving that it should be, based on how you've quantized it. So you can mess with some of these parameters, and these are all fair game, right? Any questions on any of that? Remember, individual or group note quantization, if I only want to quantize a portion, I can select the notes, go in here, quantize it to that degree, give it the amount of swing that I want it to have, right? And I can do that with sections, which a lot of times is a nice way to do like things that are just really dense polyphonic stuff, because if you go and snap everything to a grid, and you can go to a Q strength, and you can kind of meet in the middle somewhere, but a lot of times it's nice to kind of keep like turns and things that are more subtle alone, and take things like chords and quantize those a little bit more by selecting them and choosing quantize. So you can mess with selectively quantizing sections or quantizing the whole thing and using a variance.
That's